Not the only one. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining. We're going to give about 2 minutes for everyone to file in. So take your time, do what you got to do, and we will get started in 2 minutes. Thanks so much. Yeah, I mean, I was like, wow, I should have brought a whole box of Kleenexes to that movie. That
Oh
was
man, right? You see the trailer and you're like, oh, this will be fun. What a great little kids movie. And then right off the bat, you're like, oh, it reminded me of the movie Up. I feel like that movie also is another
absolutely.
just, such
Yep.
a emotional hit right in the beginning.
Yep. We're talking about the movie if anybody's seen it or if you're going to see it, bring some Kleenexes. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah.
Be ready to shed a tear. But it was done very well. It was cute.
Yeah. This webinar will not be as either entertaining or emotional, hopefully, as that
Not an
movie.
emotional roller coaster? Okay, good. I did bring the
Yeah,
Kleenexes, so.
that's right. That's right. We'll get
Thank
into it.
Or the popcorn. I should have maybe brought that.
Yeah, everyone, that's a good idea. We should be serving, providing like popcorn and Sour Patch Kids for all these events.
That would be amazing. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining. We will get started in about 30 seconds. I think you're onto something there, Zach. BWG concession stand.
There you go. I tell you, that's that's the way of the future. There, diversified income streams, probably.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I know my daughter would be in the audience. Say Sour Patch Kids, and she's there.
Yeah, right. That is for sure. Yeah, it's a go-to.
Awesome. All right. I think we got everyone. Cool. Happy Thursday, everyone. We're going to kick this off. I am Tiffany Service Gustafson, a digital strategist with BWG Connect, and we are a network and knowledge sharing group. We stay on top of the latest trends, challenges, whatever's shaping the digital landscape. We want to know and talk about it. We will do at least 500 of these virtual events this year due to the increase in demand to better understand the digital space. We'll also do at least 100 in-person small format dinners throughout the US throughout this year. So if you happen to live in a tier 1 city in the US, feel free to check out our website, bwgconnect.com, or drop us an email. We'd love for you to join. The dinners are typically 15 to 20 people having a discussion around a certain digital topic, and we always have a great time. We spend the majority of our time talking to brands. That's how we stay on top of the latest trends. We'd love to have a conversation with you, so feel free to drop me an email at Tiffany, Tiffany at bwgconnect.com, and we can get some time on the calendar. It's from these conversations we generate the topic ideas we know people want to learn about, and it's also where we gain our resident experts, such as Sigil, who's with us today. Anybody that we asked to teach the collective community has come highly recommended from multiple brands within our network. So if you're ever in need of any recommendations within the digital space, please don't hesitate to reach out. We have a short list of the best, and we would love to provide that information to you. A few housekeeping items. First and foremost, we want this to be fun, educational, conversational. Drop the questions, comments into the chat or the Q&A, and we will get to them as we move along. We did start about 3 to 4 minutes here after the hour, so rest assured we will wrap up at least 10 minutes or so before the end of the hour to give you ample time to get to your next meeting or wherever you need to go. So with that, let's roll and start to talk about practical tips to manage unauthorized resellers and avoid common pitfalls. The team at Sigil are awesome partners of the BWG communities. I'm going to kick it over to you, Zach. If you can give an intro on yourself, that would be also lovely. And then we can dive into the information. Thank you all for joining.
Awesome. Absolutely. Thanks, Tiffany. Appreciate it. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. Just a quick note too, Tiffany mentioned those dinners, and I have routinely heard really good responses from folks who attend the BWG dinners. So if you do get that opportunity, I would strongly recommend that you take advantage of that one. So, and thank you for the intro on it, Tiffany. Happy to be here. And, I want this, kind of my goal for this webinar for everyone here is to come away from this having a good understanding whether you're going to be dealing with resellers yourselves or looking at the different options or tools, partners, technologies out there. I want you to have a good understanding of the trade-offs and opportunities for all of them so that you're positioned to make a good and informed decision. So That's my goal. If you have questions along the way, just like you said, please throw them in the chat and the Q&A, and we'll try to get to them as, make sure everyone gets all the value that they can out of this webinar. So with that, we'll just kind of give you an overview of what we're going to go over, form sort of a framework, and then we'll get into the details of it. So I'll start off with some of my qualifications, just so that you guys can understand where I'm coming from as I offer some opinions and insights onto this and my level of experience. And then it'll also sort of explain how I got into this industry, et cetera. And then because we've got folks on the call who are at, different degrees of knowledge and expertise in this space, we'll start at kind of a high level and put a context around this for everyone to catch up to speed. And then basically progressively narrow down on the focus topic for today, which is really going to be about unauthorized resellers. So I'll start with a brief overview of the safeguarding your brand framework that I teach a lot of brands how to do their protection. And then getting into one piece of that is the reseller part. And so for that, we'll talk about traditional techniques for resellers, and then I'll update everybody on kind of the new technology, the new trends, what to expect and see, pitfalls related to these, et cetera. And then questions at the end. So get started here, going into kind of my background and qualifications. There's a hilarious headshot for you. So my background is as an IP attorney. I was at a top 10 global firm out in Washington, DC, and representing great, global brands like Apple and Samsung, et cetera. And from that firm, I then went in-house, become in-house general counsel with a global brand, and ran into all of the legal problems that you can imagine in the area of brand protection. That's how I came to learn the full, safeguarding framework, and was fortunate. I got to meet and be mentored by a long-term expert in the brand protection space. He had, at the time, 30 plus years of experience with, Fortune 500 brands doing this. And he kind of took me under his wing, showed me how this world kind of operated. And so we did all types of things. We were raiding factories overseas, and we were embedded with customs and police. We were filing lawsuits everywhere, just kind of everything you can imagine. You name it, we kind of did it. And because of my background from the firm, I knew a lot of attorneys in this space, attorneys at Amazon and at Walmart, and got to work with them and understand their systems and their opportunities and limitations. I advised them on some of their policies for dealing with sellers, et cetera. And then I also met a lot of other brands who had these kinds of problems. And so I left that company and had my own legal practice, kind of a boutique legal practice, just really focused on this area, brand protection, and in particular, an online enforcement piece, and had a method of removing these sellers from the marketplaces that was effective, but it was still fundamentally paying for an attorney to do that work. And so one day I remember I met with my brands. My brand said, "Hey, Zach, this is great, but we need to find a better way. I want to be able to click a button and see this disappear." And so that was the beginning of this company here, Sigil. That was about 3 years ago, where we set up to basically build that technology for brands to find that optimized, most simple and efficient and effective means for removal. So I will talk about that product here as part of this presentation. I don't get to it till the end as part of the new technology and trends. I will do my best to be objective about it, obviously. But I obviously think that it's a good product, but I'll try to tell or narrow in on when it's the right tool for which brands, et cetera, as I'll do that for all the things that we're going to talk about today. So that's kind of the introduction on my qualifications. And now let me get into kind of this broader context here for doing the safeguarding your brand framework, and then we'll narrow it down from there. I like to flag this because understanding, like, managing unauthorized sellers is part of a much bigger process. And it's useful to just keep that in mind, because you'll never fully solve for this. Unauthorized sellers have been around for as long as there have been marketplaces, but there's ways you can do it, and you can identify the better opportunities for investment or not, depending on the size and structure of your brand, your distribution, et cetera, and like where these problems show up for you. So just as a starting point, right, there's sort of a 3-layer framework. And I start with the foundation here, which is securing your manufacturing, right? And there are various tactics that you can get into to try to control your manufacturing stream. that, like, this whole framework, broadly speaking, is the subject of a different webinar. If folks are interested in that, please let Tiffany know, and we can do another one of those. But just briefly, there's that foundational piece, the tactics for any manufacturing. My mentor in that space, he had a mantra for all these little things. So I like to offer these mantras to help brands remember too, which is, you can't trust your own mother. And I learned that lesson the hard way, not with my mother, who's wonderful, but other very close relationships. Then the next step up after you've got your manufacturing under control is training your supply chain. Obviously a difficult challenge for many brands. There are lots of different ways to deal with traceability and techniques. Just like as a note, a lot of times spending money on expensive technology in that area is not the best solution. So, and my mentor really drove that into me with this mantra that every penny counts for that. And then the final piece, ideally, if you have all that foundation in place, then you'd go after the final piece of cleaning up retail, which is, obviously you've got to deal with your sellers. And there are two sides of this coin, right? You have authorized partners cleaning up that, but then you have unauthorized sellers. We're going to be focusing on that, the tail side of that coin for today. And the mantra being, right, keep fighting the good fight. So I'm going to go over the ways that you fight this fight, help you get good at it. Keep in mind, right, that as long as if you're starting at that top point, there's always going to be leaks lower down in that foundation, but we'll give you the best tools and advice that I can for you to kind of start at that top piece there. So let's get into it. We're going to focus in. I'm going to start with the traditional techniques for dealing with unauthorized sellers. And then from there, we'll get into kind of the updated stuff. For many of you folks who are familiar or have tried all these techniques, you'll understand, right? There's a reason why you do them. They are kind of tried and true. There's, you can do them, but there are limits to those, and we'll kind of talk about those right now. So traditional techniques for dealing with sellers, there's basically 3 of them, right? You've got, and you can pursue these through either just manual means, in-house counsel, or, hiring attorneys for this, or there are methods of, there are automation tools and technologies that you can do to try to automate sending out messages, right? There's probably no surprise that technology exists. Many of you are likely working with some type of map monitoring company, and they typically will have tools to help you send these messages automatically. Whether you are using technology for this service or manually doing it, doesn't really impact, how I'm going to explain this and their effectiveness. Obviously, that can impact the cost overall for you, and we can kind of discuss that if people have specific questions of what to look for. But I'm going to get into, so I'm going to go into each of these. For each of them, I'm going to explain basically what they are, the pros and cons and pitfalls for all of them, and then when is the best time to use these different techniques. So I'll start with notice letters, right? So notice letters, this is the simplest version. As you're going through this 1, 2, and 3, it's basically the simplest, most cost-effective down to the most complex and intense. So as a starting point, typically in a DIY kind of situation, it's just notice letters, right? So you're just sending a notice out to the seller, like, hey, you are not an authorized seller, and the sale of this product is limited to authorized sellers. It doesn't include then another step up, right? There's not a demand for information. There's not a demand that they stop selling. It's just very clearly, hey, we're just putting you on notice. And the pro of that, obviously, is you can get in and do that yourself. It's generally very low cost because you're just doing it. If you have an automating service, great, or however you want to do it. It'll take a little bit of time. It's very simple. The con is that it doesn't have a big impact, right? You're going to scare off the kind of the one-off or the occasional sellers who would otherwise be on eBay or what have you, and now are trying to do their Amazon storefront, just book them off, and that's fine. And so sometimes that's enough. You're really looking at about, what you should expect for that is about 20% removal rates after doing that for about a year. You should take out about 20% of those sellers. So for some brands, that's a valuable impact given the cost or budget that they have available, but not necessarily for everybody. The pitfall that I want to identify here is about using seller messaging. And so kind of the low-hanging fruit to message these sellers is to get on Amazon and send them a message through seller messaging. And I just want brands to be careful and mindful of that, right? That is not how seller messaging is set and is intended to be used. And it's very easy for those sellers to then flip around and report that as a violation policy. And then that can be held against you on your account, your seller account, or your brand registry account. So you have to be a little bit cautious when you're sending those seller messages. Best practice would be to send those messages through whatever other contact information you can get on that seller, right? They'll have name and address and sometimes phone number on the storefront, supposed to. You can sometimes look them up and get some other information. So that's best practice. And I guess I'm going to go a little bit off script on this piece too, and just flag this. What we started seeing really as about like mid-April was a really high increase in the rate of like accounts being flagged and suspended on the Amazon side. So we've heard this from a lot of brands that we've been working with, a lot of our own brands and companies that we work with, and just so I just want to add that caution, right? It seems like it's been a kind of early implementation of Amazon's AI to identify some of this, but they're infractions or violations that historically have been like not really an issue or not an issue for 4 or 5 years are suddenly now flagging up and leading to account suspensions. You usually can get those resolved through appeals or what have you. And so, I'm not like trying to raise the alarm, but it's disruptive. So, and as we're going into Prime Day, it's something to be mindful of just be cautious with the seller messaging if you're basically at all, but certainly if you're going to go about using this technique.
That's very interesting. So it's the AI you're assuming is finding the language being authoritative to be, and then noting that as, hey, that's going against the rules of Amazon, and then they put you on pause. That's
right
through the seller messaging. So only through
right. It's usually something to do with the or oftentimes another seller will report it, or like that seller that you've messaged will report it. Hey, this is a violation. So it's there's a couple of different issues there. Yeah.
Good to know.
So the time to use these kind of notice letters is really if you're just you want to target them at kind of the hobbyist resellers as much as you can. And you can identify them usually by just looking at their storefront and kind of looking at the number of products that they have, the number of reviews that they have. They tend to have, a few dozen very random assortment of products that they're selling. Reviews will be, 100 or less or something like that. And so they tend to be small time kind of hobbyists. And those are good people to target with, sending a notice to. Investigation letters, that's kind of the next step up. Right. And so this is, you're not threatening legal activity, you're sending them a notice, but then you're basically demanding some kind of information about them to investigate them. So it's usually paired then with another. You say, we see you're selling, you're not authorized, only authorized or allowed to sell. You need to send proof of verification that this product is authentic, send us your invoices or whatever your order forms so that we can verify and authenticate you. If not, we'll report you to Amazon or to brand registry. So that's what it looks like. The pro of this method is just that it's still pretty cheap. You're just sending these letters. You don't necessarily have to have lawyers for it, although obviously as a lawyer, I'm gonna be like, get a lawyer. But they're pretty cheap, and you can get slightly more effectiveness out of it because there's a little bit more of that demand. Right. And so you're looking after about a year, looking at about 40% removal rates on that. And the other benefit is sometimes you'll get those invoices back. Right now, we can get into like, are they valid invoices, fraud, and you should investigate them and compare them to order rates and what have you. But sometimes you can get those invoices back, and then you've learned of, oh, here's where my supply chain leak is. Right. So that can be a useful technique sometimes. So those are kind of the pros for it. The pitfall here is what I said about the threat when they say, hey, if you don't show us that this is legitimate, then we're going to report you in brand registry. That report is almost always presented as a counterfeit violation, right? We can authenticate you, so this is counterfeit product, you can't sell it. Counterfeit violations are taken very seriously by Amazon and Walmart, as well they should. And so they will remove sellers or remove offerings that are reported as counterfeit. But the flip side to that is if it's not a counterfeit product, right, then whoever filed that false complaint is subject to liability. And those sanctions, there are sanctions around that, attorney's fees, heightened damages. And it's an area where sellers have been successful suing brands in counterclaims around this. So it's an area of risk. I always like to let people know, like, hey, if someone's recommending filing a counterfeit complaint, like, use caution, talk to them about it, understand why, make sure they know about those lawsuits and are familiar with the facts, et cetera, related to it. Consider asking them for indemnifications, hold harmless agreements, et cetera. And like, especially now in this kind of post mid-April world of account suspensions coming up, like, it's just another place to be a little bit more cautious, is what I would say.
Mm-hmm. Good to know. And just to confirm, when you had made mention of Amazon suspending accounts due to sending those messages through seller messaging that were more authoritative in nature, those were actually the brands, the owners, the manufacturers, the product makers that were being suspended, correct? It was not 3P sellers. So it's the brand owner that's being suspended, potentially.
That's correct.
That's big.
Yeah, to be fair to Amazon on some of this, something about 25% of complaints are false. So they get a lot of noise through their system, and they're working hard to, to identify the good from the bad. But just as a raw reality, you're going to get a lot of pushback. So that's why brands, you want to be smart and careful about it and make sure you're making your complaints and kind of following the rules the right way, just to minimize the amount of blowback that could happen.
Mm-hmm.
So the final method of the category of traditional techniques, right, is utilizing legal documents. And there's an escalation path for all of this, right? It's typically you're starting with cease and desist letters, but it can also then get into preservation notices or filing lawsuits, or even without filing, but just drafting and sending them, or preliminary injunction motions, et cetera. There's a number of those. Obviously, qualified attorneys and counsel can advise you on that path and those escalation methods, but that's kind of, generally speaking, kind of what falls into this bucket. Right? The pro here is your effectiveness kicks up. People do get scared. They don't want to fight. It's not worth the money, et cetera. And so after about a year-long campaign or so, you should expect to see around 60% kind of effectiveness removal rates for sending, some of these angrier letters. If you're prepared to file those lawsuits and follow up with it, right, then you'll see even further impact and effectiveness. Typically, most brands, right, don't have their own budget in order to support that lawsuit. And so it is kind of, because we've been at this game for 20 plus years now, a lot of the more professional sellers understand that brands are not going to follow up with that lawsuit. And so they'll just ignore that process and keep selling. So you'll get off a lot of the hobbyists or the mid-sized folks. The bigger sellers, they'll be, present a little bit more of a challenge there. Obviously, it's getting a little bit more expensive to do that. So that's sort of the trade-off. Still oftentimes worth the investment, but you definitely want to work with attorneys, qualified counsel on that. BWG Connect is a great network of qualified attorneys who help and advise and deal with that. So Tiffany can point everyone in the right direction for anybody who needs those kind of services. The pitfall here is sort of a different pitfall, right? The pitfall is for you emotionally. It's typically like the brands I work with, they get themselves wrapped up into this and trip themselves up. The thing I would say to remember is, imagine if you received a cease and desist letter. What you would do is you would go talk to a lawyer, right? That's the reasonable and responsible thing to do. And so a lot of times what happens is these sellers, they receive that cease and desist letter and they respond with their own attorney who has a counter demand. And that can get brands really aggressive and angry, and then it escalates without it being productive, which is not a responsible thing to do, right? Responsible sellers are hiring attorneys. And so yes, that attorney is going to come and they're going to, be super aggressive because they're trying to, establish a certain negotiation threshold. But the tip here is to separate your emotions out of this, right? Don't get caught up into a lawsuit or the battle, and just remember, okay, we've got two reasonable parties here. They have attorneys. Like, let's get to a reasonable solution at the end, right? So, and in that spectrum, I typically say, or a lot of times what works best for brands is, hey, try to negotiate with them, so have them sell through, and then give up the source of where they're getting the product and not buy it anymore, right? And then you can kind of close that gap for a while, and then you learn about leaks in your supply chain, and you can go, investigate that. So, that's the thing to be mindful of. Don't get caught up with attorneys. Attorneys can really exaggerate the issues, and just keep your eye on kind of the core of what matters. So,
You said it. I did.
yeah, yeah. Lawyers are nobody hates them more than me. I'll just put it that way. So when kind of I might have missed this in the early one, so I'm checking my notes here, but just when best to use the lawyers and utilize the field documents is probably true for investigation demands too. Actually, no, I'm sorry. So let me go back. When best to use these things for investigation demands, the best to use that is when you're kind of low budget trying to solve this issue, or really curious about supply chains. So brands who have like two-step distribution, utilizing investigation demands can sometimes be a really helpful like technique just to start surfacing out where those leaks are coming from. And then stepping up from that, when you're doing the legal documents, you want to engage counsel or kind of take this step really when the budget justifies it. So you're really losing money to these resellers. And so like that's the time to be mindful of buybacks loss, price erosion, major channel conflicts with your stores. If you're losing reorders from your big retailers because of price matching or having to compensate them or something, that's when it's like, okay, I'm losing six figures. I need to get a lawyer involved so we can deal with this. Right? Those are good times to look out for that. Before I move on to getting into kind of the update on the new technology trends, I do just want to offer a couple quick final thoughts on the traditional techniques. Is that like a program that works really well if brands do it is buying back inventory. It allows that seller that you're dealing with to exit. They're much more likely to sign agreements and not, purchase again and give you information about where they're getting it because they've offloaded their stuff. You get that inventory back, you can inspect it, resell it, etc. And so it's a really effective program if brands set it up. Many brands I meet are just not willing to put in the efforts to go about it. So if that's something that anyone's ever interested in and want to talk about more, like learning tips around that, let me know and I can definitely kind of point you in the right direction.
Do you see brands when they do buy it back also asking them like, you must tell me where you got this inventory from, divulge your source?
Yeah. You want to get that information from them as much as possible. And when when you're getting into these negotiations, you can sign, confidentiality agreements or what have you, and offer, protections or anonymity, etc. But you want to find out that source and that leak for them. You also want to be careful when you're buying back inventory too. I mean, every time you pull something out of inventory, every time a unit gets touched, right, there's a chance for breakage, etc. And so there are practicalities, right? Brands who have good 3PL relationships, right, are usually good partners or opportunities for doing this, etc. We can get into. There's a lot of details to get into for it. Fun. All right, great. Thanks, everyone. Now we get into kind of the new tech and trends, the questions I've been hearing from our brands lately, and sort of what we've seen and try to point folks in the right direction. So, not surprisingly, given how much of an issue unauthorized sellers have become in the last few years, there's more activity and interest around this area, people trying to make money on it or utilize new technology. Not to be disrespectful, obviously, I'm one of those people, so it's a thing. Amazon, I'll go through these. I hear a lot of questions about Amazon's kind of programs. The last time we did this webinar, we didn't really cover this, so I wanted to update this information here for everybody. So we'll get into the Amazon programs and then some of the way the new technologies are being applied. The thing to remember on the Amazon programs is like this is still Amazon that we're dealing with, and they're trying to make money. And, it's like Bezos's famous phrase that your margin is my opportunity. Like they are here to make a lot of money. So the Amazon programs are pretty expensive, but let me kind of explain them. There are good times to use them though. Like there's good uses. All of these programs, there are better use cases and not use cases. So there's no one size fits all. So with Amazon Transparency, right, this is basically a serialized barcode program, and you get an Amazon specific serialized barcode. So if you're not already serializing your products, your merchandise, you can have them do it. They'll give you the sticker and put it on the box, etc. And then they will, whenever a seller tries to make an offer on your ASIN, if it's a transparency product, then it'll request a transparency code in order for them to make that offer. That's conceptually how it works. Pros, cons, and kind of pitfalls to it. So the pro is that serialization is an effective strategy. That's true all through the supply chain, and certainly on Amazon, right? Is that they can track it. So it works really well, but it's built for counterfeits. It's not built for unauthorized resellers. So this kind of leads into one of the cons, right? So if you got counterfeits, it is great, a really good program for that. If you have resellers, which is probably folks who are here on this call, it is less effective. In fact, you shouldn't be using it at all if that's your problem. So let me get into the cons, right? So first is that it's expensive. Serialization is expensive. You're putting stickers on units. You're increasing the per unit cost of everything. The more units that you have, right, the more expensive that gets. So that's a challenge. And then the second thing is it's restricted to anti-counterfeit. So it says, and then this is the pitfall, right, is that the policies around this is that you cannot use Amazon Transparency to remove resellers. And if you do, you have your account suspended. So there's that risk to it. The other thing is transparency has like a quantity threshold. And so if you're selling below a certain quantity of the units, you actually don't need those transparency codes. So it sounds great at first, but then the practical application is good for some people. I think for most brands is pretty limited. So in terms of when best to use kind of the Amazon transparency, is what I would say is it's got to be where Amazon is like one of your best accounts and channels, but because you're also like, it only addresses the issue on Amazon, it doesn't fix it off Amazon. And you're getting further, you're deepening your relationship with Amazon. Some brands are comfortable with that, but some brands are not. And we've seen a checkered history of Amazon in the past and how it works with brands. And, right now, I think there's a big challenge for brands went 1P. And if they wanted to go 3P, they're sort of stuck where they are. That can be a topic of a different day's conversation. But that's something to be mindful of how deep you want your brand to be connected into Amazon on that. But if it is one of your main sales channels and you have counterfeits, then transparency is great. It's a great option for you. I would recommend that for sure. Especially if your product price point is really high compared to your units, just often in sort of counterfeited industries, then it's a good program.
Does it add friction to other retailers? Have you seen that? Does Walmart not like that? Does it add friction to other retailers? For example, does Walmart not like if you're using transparency on your boxes?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I don't have a good answer to it. So what I can say is I have had brands that I've talked to ask me that, right? And so I know that it's a concern because you've got different labels. I haven't heard the answer to that question yet, but I think it's something to be mindful of. It's also challenging, right? Because if you're not a brand if you don't have dedicated Amazon inventory, right? Like, or, sometimes that presents a challenge, or like if you have a good 3PL and you're considering seller fulfilled prime, right? For a lot of brands, that's a great option to get into. Transparency is kind of hard to integrate into that. So.
Interesting. We have some comments coming in that brands have seen that there's been friction with other e-tailers and they think Amazon is spying on them.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
There's something to think about, and goes to your point that if Amazon is your main customer, it makes sense. But if it's fluid inventory, think accordingly. So cool.
Great. So I'll jump into Amazon Premium Beauty. This is another one I get a lot of questions on. This is a relatively new program over at Amazon. It's kind of like they're trying to revive brand gating, but only for the beauty space. So Premium Beauty, you have to get kind of invited and get through the application process. But once you're a premium beauty brand, and it only applies to beauty brands right now, then they offer brand gating, basically. So that's what it is, which sounds great and exciting, right? The pro to this is if you can get your brand gated on Amazon, in theory, you're looking at 100% removal of unauthorized sellers on Amazon. Right? There's no way to get 100% removal of unauthorized sellers, basically anywhere or in any other combination of tools. So that could be really great. The trade-off for that though is extreme. So Amazon Premium Beauty charges like 15, I believe it's 15% for every unit sold. So a lot of times we'll double your Amazon fees for that situation, just for the privilege of being gated. But then the gating process takes 6 months. So you get a 90-day window to identify the seller that you want removed. And then you get a 90-day window that Amazon has to remove them. So at the end of that 6-month period, you can have those sellers removed. Obviously, that timeline is really challenging because it's hard to make a big impact with that. The other problem that you have there is with sellers, there's a lot of seller behavior where they're on at one time and then off your listing and then on and then off. So I think that the mechanics of tracking that will be a challenge for a lot of brands and for Amazon. And that's sort of what gets to me for the premium beauty. So the brands that I'm working with, I know who have enrolled in this program have relatively recently enrolled. And so we're before that 6-month period. So we'll see how effective it is and also how much work it takes to get there. Amazon stopped its brand gating program years ago when it originated. For those of you on the call who remember that program, right, there was a brand gating program. But even for the brands that I knew who were gated, still were riddled with reseller problems. It's just the practicality of enforcement is actually very difficult with seller behaviors, et cetera. So we'll see. We'll see. That's the kind of pitfall here is I think that this program is yet to be proven out as effective. In terms of when to use it, though, is I think there's kind of 2 use cases where if I were a brand, I'd be considering doing an Amazon Premium Beauty relationship. Right. One is where, hey, Amazon channel actually you don't care that much about. So this is kind of the opposite of the transparency situation. You don't really care about Amazon as your own sales channel, or you don't do a lot of business, or like the SKUs you have on there are pretty basic. But you're having a lot of channel conflict problems with your retailer. So if you're a big kind of brick and mortar retail brand, and you need to clean up channel conflict with premium beauty or on Amazon, right? Then I think that's a use case for checking it out, because then those sales are not a big hit. The other place is you might be a brand who hasn't had the space to invest in brand protection for a lot of years, and your problem might be enormous. In which case, the only way to get your hands around it is to spend 6 to 12 months in a premium beauty and just kind of wipe the slate clean before you go to a more cost-effective maintenance solution. So those would be 2 areas that I would consider for brands. All right, I want to make sure that we're leaving time for questions. So I'm going to hit these next 2 pretty quick. Blockchain technology. This is just sort of your modern version of serialization. And it's there have been some interesting new tools and technologies that have solved for the issue of having to attach tags. You don't necessarily have to attach tags anymore to products for blockchain. You can kind of scan your packaging and they can connect that up to blockchain. So the benefit over traditional serialization there is that you can repeatedly update any information associated with that product and where it goes, where it gets shipped. As far as the tool for managing unauthorized sellers, it's still about only as useful as serialization. And so it's very slow, it's very expensive. You still have to do test buys, right? There's no actual enforcement built in with this. It's not, So, and the other piece is, even if the product is serialized and it gets resold through a few different territories, it might still be appropriate product to sell. And so there's the pitfall here I always kind of recommend for folks is like you need to get confirmation on things just because you've done one test buy that doesn't necessarily show that you're, that you should be ready to take aggressive actions against those sellers. So we'll see. I like to mention blockchain because there are great minds in the space who are working hard to kind of elevate that technology. And that could be something that really comes up. What I would say is right now for brands, in terms of if you're wondering when to use this or not, it's still too soon. Use case hasn't proven out and not worth the investment yet. The last piece is AI, right? The topic of the day, utilizing AI in every aspect of our companies and business. AI technologies are really, there's lots of different ways to use AI for this. You can use AI like ChatGPT to help with all the traditional techniques, etc. Kind of where I'm focused on for this conversation is more of the programs that are using AI kind of natively to find new ways to help and enforce. And so jumping to the end here, obviously my favorite one is what my company does. So Sigil basically uses AI built into its product to improve the effectiveness of removals. Kind of the distinction is that we can use AI and automation tools to then, instead of going directly to the sellers the way the traditional techniques do, we're able to go directly to the marketplace and work with them in order to remove the sellers. And that distinction creates a lot of efficiencies, especially utilizing the technology. And so you can drive costs down, you can have a faster impact and a higher impact basically with that. So the pros of using kind of artificial intelligence tools in this space, and specifically I would be referring to the Sigil's tools in this case. People have other questions about other AI tools, I'm happy to answer those. But the kind of the pro in this kind of case is you're looking for that automation to save you money and drive down those costs and increase your speed, right? So for example, with Sigil's removal rates, they tend to be, 70 or 80% removal rates after only a few months, as opposed to the 60% removal rates, whatever, as a year in other circumstances. So much higher. And then it's very cheap. It's less expensive than pretty much any of the other options on here because you get those benefits out of the technology. Kind of the con and the pitfall here that I would say is the con is that it's still, technology is new and it's still pretty limited, and like the accuracy outside of its like tried and true area is, it takes a while before we get further accuracy. But so like with Sigil services, it's really only useful for Amazon and Walmart related disruption. And really, and this is the pitfall piece to it, it's really just best for protecting your buy box. If your issue is rogue listings and people putting up a bunch of other listings, then the artificial intelligence, like image matching and stuff, is just, that is technology that is still in development, right? It just has not gotten to the accuracy level of identifying those image variants yet to be accurate and effective enough on that. So hopefully in a couple of years, that stuff's going to be really strong. But right now, right, that tech just isn't quite there. So that's what I'd say in terms of who to use it for the artificial intelligence tools. Kind of like I mentioned, like if your Walmart or Amazon channels are really important to you and you need something like fast or low budget, right, starting with a quick AI tool and kind of getting that initial cleanup is a great place to get you started. You can then use that time to investigate if you need escalation points or where else to go. So that was a lot of information try to send to everybody here, and now I'm trying to save some time for questions. So I'll pause there and we can get into questions.
Thank you so much, Zach. Questions, comments, put into the chat or the Q&A. We got some here lined up. So for Sigil, do you have any specific product categories that you work on?
No, the nice thing about it is the AI technology especially really helps flow in between different industry categories. So Sigil's tool specifically is category agnostic. And so it works on from furniture to medical devices to CPG to electronics to home goods, etc. And it works, it works for the specific problem, right, of resellers, Amazon and Walmart. And that problem can affect giant brands or tiny brands, right? And so it's not, so anyway, that's kind of the advantage of combining the AI and the automation is making it scalable as needed. So we have like small brands with a big problem, and this is an affordable place, or we have really big brands, but they kind of have a small problem. So, great in-house legal teams have been doing this for years, right? So then it's a nice tool to supplement what they have. So there's a lot of flexibility around it.
Awesome. One question here for the Q&A section. One of our common issues with unauthorized sellers is that these sellers don't respond. How do you suggest brands deal with that when we don't want to go down the road of legal action?
What is it that you're sending them that they're not responding to?
So
Would
that
be
is
my question back. Hopefully that
question
person will
one.
respond and we can get into it. But
Okay.
otherwise, generally, if they're not responding and you don't want to hire lawyers, you're going to want to, either like explore an automated removal tool like Sigils, or look for supply chain investigation, and you want to track back up into where they're getting their product so you can cut the source out from them. So you're looking at test buys, or there are investigators, and I'm happy to make introductions or connect folks to people. We know all those investigators or those techniques and consultants, etc. If that's something that you want to explore. So still slow, but cheaper than lawyers.
Right. Cool. How about where did it go? Oh, here we are. How about Amazon allowing you to use your own SKU or company's serialization instead of using transparency? You got to use transparency, right?
Yeah, so pretty rare. I've only heard of it happening one time, and it was for a like Fortune 100 brand. And so I think that there are some companies who have sufficient clout that are able to demand and negotiate for that. And so it's that's like the exception, right? Every other situation I've ever heard, even for very large brands, it's you got to pay.
Got to pay up. If Sigil isn't able to remove the unauthorized seller, what happens next?
Yeah, so basically the same thing as in other cases. So one, with the way Sigil's tool works is that because it's dealing with complaints straight to the marketplace, then after one complaint, there are just additional complaints. And so there's sort of like a hammering away at that until everyone's probably familiar with account health scores, until sellers' account health scores come down so much that they're forced to basically respond or pull that off. So there's sort of a timeline. So for some really difficult sellers, it takes longer. For some, it's much faster. If that doesn't work, right, alternatively, you're looking at your traditional techniques. So you're either doing that supply chain investigation to try to cut off the source, or right, looking at escalating into legal. And again, only if it's going to impact your budget enough, right? You want to utilize your resources the best way possible. Like I always tell brands, focus on your top, 20% of your SKUs, right? Those tend to be the most money makers, right? So don't just chase everybody on the long tail, focus on your more important products.
Absolutely. 80-20 rule all the time. Can you get into the weeds a little bit, explain the process that AI tools take to remove the resellers? I'm curious about this too. Like, how does that work?
Yeah, sure. So essentially, there are certain obligations that marketplaces have that if they're presented with the right kinds of evidence, right, they have to act, otherwise they're violating the law themselves. So the AI and the automation tools are intended to supercharge the ability to investigate the specific sellers around those obligations for the marketplace. So for example, with Sigils, because AI is so new still, we have humans that are in control and charge of everything. We don't want to just have the robots doing it all. But it basically gives our investigators rapid ability to kind of at scale conduct these investigations and gather that evidence that's needed, that kind of legal evidence that's needed. And then the tool also simplifies, automates, the process of submitting those violation reports straight to the marketplace. As everyone here knows, the back end of dealing with the marketplaces is a bit of a nightmare, right? The right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing. So there's a lot of challenges back and forth. So that's another place where just the automation and the AI works really well to reduce that friction and that time cost, to keep those down as we kind of work through, there's usually requests for additional information and follow-up, et cetera. And so that's kind of the general sort of two-step process of investigation and then submission.
Cool. Interesting. So what are the things that Sigil looks for with a new partner? Do you have to have all your policies in shape, trademarks, and seller authorizations all in place to be able to take on a tool such as Sigils?
Really good question. And there's, I mean, like that makes it easy, right? So brands that work with there are some very well-known law firms that are in this space, in this industry, and some very well-respected attorneys. Brands who are working with those firms who then come to us are the easiest because all that stuff is all set up, right? And we kind of say it's the difference between mowing the lawn and chopping down your tree. Those firms can chop down any tree you need, but using an axe to mow your lawn is really inefficient. And so it's really effective to kind of start there and then move to using our service. For brands who haven't retained counsel to go through all of that, it is not a complicated process of making sure that we have all the boxes checked for us to be able to run. So usually we do an onboarding consultation to say, okay, well, here are the things that we're looking for. Let's see what's missing. Okay, we'll tell you the specific things that are missing. All right, and then, you know, we are not lawyer, like we do not do legal advice here, Sigil. So we'll then either, you know, give you examples or guide you to other attorneys, whoever can help you do it. But it's a pretty, you know, we've got that process pretty narrowed down at this point to try to just highlight the specifics of things that we need.
Excellent. And a few more questions here about transparency and what it is exactly. So just to confirm, transparency is an Amazon-only program. It's for counterfeit predominantly and preferably high price point. I used it in home decor for high price point. You do have to pay per label per se, per serial number that you put on the box. So it is an added cost to your product. And again, it's not going to help the reseller challenge you may have in the market. It's going to help if you have a counterfeit issue. And you can always look up transparency, the Amazon program, be able to Google that. Awesome. I think we got through all of them. Zach, thank you so much. You always bring so much to the table. We appreciate your time, your expertise. We definitely encourage follow-up conversation with Zach and the Sigil. People are asking Sigil. Sigil. We'll be sending follow-up emails to everybody. So if you do want to connect with Zach and team, definitely feel free to. And we would love to have a conversation with you. That's how we get the content ideas for future webinars. So feel free to reach out to me at tiffany@bwgconnect.com. So with that, it is a wrap. Happy Thursday, everyone. Take care. Thank you for joining. And thank you again, Zach. Take care.
Thanks, everyone. Cheers.